novel by Mipo Wole. The night Stephanie Douglas was born, the elders said the earth did not sleep. They said the wind moved differently, slow, deliberate, as though carrying a message it was unsure how to deliver. The moon sat low, swollen and coppered, hovering over the red soil of the Douglas kingdom, like an eye that refused to close. By morning, the midwives whispered among themselves. By evening, the diviners had been summoned. Stephanie arrived first, silent but alert, her eyes opening too soon, too knowingly. She did not cry immediately. She watched. Her skin carried the warmth of the land, her fingers curling instinctively as though grasping something unseen. Angela followed less than 2 hours later, loud, defiant, announcing herself with a cry that split the air and startled the women holding her. Where Stephanie was composed, Angela was flame. Where one inhaled the world, the other demanded it answer back. Twin spirits born of different temperaments. 2 daughters to King Douglas and his Lolo. Gifts wrapped in prophecy. They will not walk the same path. The eldest diviner warned softly, drawing symbols into ash, but their shadows will always touch. The king listened. He always did. They grew as opposites, shaped by the same love. Stephanie learned stillness early. She watched people before speaking, absorbed silence like scripture. She loved books, shadows, the calm certainty of order. When she walked, she carried herself like someone aware that eyes followed her, even when none did. Angela learned movement. Laughter came easily to her. She spoke with her hands, danced with her feet, loved loudly and without apology. Where Stephanie retreated inward, Angela reached outward. And yet, when night came, they shared the same mat, whispering dreams into darkness, their hands finding each other instinctively. They were never apart long enough to forget they were one story written in 2 inks. The Ottadals were spoken of long before they were seen. A powerful lineage, well-tempered by discipline. A family whose name carried both respect and fear. When word arrived that the Ottadals sought union with the Douglas throne, the palace did not erupt in celebration. It went quiet. Thomason Ottadals was first mentioned, head of the family. Calculated, controlled. A man whose silence commanded attention. It was said he did not waste words or emotion. What he chose fully. Tomiwa Ottadals followed his name like a rumor, celebrity, charisma, laughter that disarmed. A man adored by crowds, effortless in charm, dangerous in appeal. Where Thomason was stone, Tomiwa was firelight. The elders approved the matches. The ancestors did not object. That should have been enough. Stephanie met Thomason beneath the Iroko tree. Their greeting was formal, their conversation measured. But when their eyes met, something ancient shifted. Not warmth, recognition. As though 2 people aware of responsibility were acknowledging the weight they would now carry together. Angela met Tomiwa in the courtyard. He smiled. She laughed. Sparks flew without permission. The kingdom rejoiced. The sisters prepared. No one noticed the silence that lingered beneath celebration. No one asked the earth whether it agreed. On the night of the weddings, tradition guided every step. Palm wine flowed, drums spoke, songs rose and fell like prayer. The sisters were adorned differently. Stephanie in deep ivory and gold. Angela in red threaded with coral. Their veils fell like separate destinies. Their hands trembled for reasons no one named. The rooms were prepared carefully, but destiny, it seemed, was careless. A corridor, a door. A moment of distraction, and the ancestors, watching. When dawn broke, the mistake had already settled into the bones of the house. Stephanie woke with a stillness she did not recognize. Angela woke with a silence she had never known. Across the palace, Thomason stood at the window, jaw clenched, eyes distant. "What is done," he said finally, voice firm as law, "is done." The earth did not argue. And somewhere beneath the palace stones, something old stirred. Morning did not arrive gently. It crept into the palace on cautious feet, as though aware it was unwelcome. Sunlight slipped through carved windows and lay thinly across the floors, illuminating nothing it could explain. Stephanie was already awake. She sat upright on the edge of the bed, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap as if in prayer, though she was not praying. Her thoughts moved too deliberately for that. Prayer required surrender. What filled her chest was reckoning. The room still carried the night, the faint warmth of another body, the lingering hush of breath not her own. She did not turn to look. She already knew what she would see, and knowledge this morning was heavier than sight. Across the corridor, Angela woke with a sharp inhale, as though pulled suddenly from deep water. Her hand flew to her mouth. The room was unfamiliar in ways she could not immediately place. Its scent, its stillness, the way the curtains fell. Then memory struck. Not all at once, not mercifully. Fragments surfaced. Laughter cut short, a door closing, a name spoken too late. A touch she had not questioned until it was already answering her. Angela sat up, heart racing, eyes wide. "No," she whispered, though the word had no one to convince. Breakfast was announced by the maidservants with practiced calm. Trays were prepared. Footsteps moved quietly through the corridors. The palace functioned as it always had, indifferent to the fact that something within its walls had shifted. Stephanie dressed carefully. She chose a restraint over beauty, structure over softness. Every movement was controlled, as though she were holding herself together with discipline alone. When she finally stepped into the corridor, she paused. Angela stood there already. Their eyes met. No words passed between them. They did not embrace. They did not accuse. What lived between them was too complex for either. Sisterhood did not dissolve, but it bent, strained under the weight of something neither had chosen. Angela looked away first. Thomason descended the staircase like a verdict. He was already composed, already armored. His face revealed nothing, but his presence filled the room, pressing silence from every corner. Tomiwa followed more slowly. His usual ease dulled, laughter absent. The four of them gathered around the breakfast table, like strangers who shared a secret too large to speak aloud. Plates were set, cups poured, no one ate. It was Thomason who broke the quiet. "What has happened?" he said evenly. "Cannot be undone." Angela's fingers tightened around her cup. Stephanie inhaled slowly. "We will not invite chaos," Thomason continued. "Not in our homes, not in our bloodlines. What the night has sealed, the morning will not unseal." His gaze moved. Not accusatory, not tender, but resolute. "This marriage stands." The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Tomiwa swallowed, nodding once. He did not speak, but something flickered behind his eyes. Confusion, perhaps, or a grief he did not yet understand. The sisters remained silent. They had been raised to respect authority, but they had also been raised to listen, to the body, to the spirit, to the quiet voice beneath ceremony. And that voice was restless. By midday, the palace had returned to movement. Responsibilities called, duties resumed. The kingdom did not pause for private fractures. Stephanie retreated into order. Meetings, correspondence, ritual observances. She did everything correctly, flawlessly, as though precision might erase memory. Angela threw herself into motion. Training sessions, laughter forced too bright, conversation that never quite reached her eyes. And beneath it all, something unfamiliar grew. Not desire, not regret. Awareness. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the palace walls, the sisters crossed paths again. This time, Angela reached out. "Steph," she said softly. Stephanie stopped. For a moment, neither spoke. "We didn't plan this," Angela said. "No," Stephanie replied, "but we are living it." Their hands found each other then, not in comfort, but in recognition. Two women standing at the edge of something unnamed. Above them, the moon began to rise, and the ancestors, patient as ever, waited. The palace was old enough to remember silence. Its walls were thick with memory, layered with breath and footfall, laughter and grief. Stone did not forget. Wood did not forgive. The corridors had carried whispered confessions long before these four had ever learned to speak their own truths. It had watched generations rise in celebration and collapse in quiet ruin. It had absorbed secrets without judgment. But now it listened differently, as though something within it had been awakened. The air itself felt aware. Stephanie felt it first. She paused in the inner corridor that led to the women's chambers, her fingertips grazing the carved wooden panels that lined the walls. The carvings told stories, battles won, vows made, unions sealed beneath ancestral blessing. Her touch traced one pattern absently, and for a fleeting second, she felt as though the wood held warmth beneath her palm. The air there was cooler than elsewhere in the palace, heavier. It pressed against her skin with deliberate weight, carrying a presence she could not name. The palace, she thought, was listening. The notion unsettled her, not because she believed it literally, but because it felt true in ways logic could not dismiss. The house had always felt protective, structured, contained. Now it felt observant. She withdrew her hands slowly and continued walking, her posture straight, her expression measured. Yet the sensation followed her, an awareness that her steps were being counted, her silences measured, her restraint cataloged. Even the echo of her heels seemed louder than usual. Angela, meanwhile, sought refuge in noise. She laughed with the maids in the dressing hall, her voice ringing bright against marble walls. She teased them about misplaced fabrics, complimented braids too dramatically, accepted gossip she barely absorbed. Movement surrounded her, voices overlapped, sound drowned thought. Still, every pause felt weighted. Every lull between sentences pulled her backward, toward memory, toward the night, toward that suspended moment at breakfast, where warmth and recognition had intertwined too easily to dismiss. It had not felt forbidden. It had felt familiar. That frightened her more. She sparred again in the courtyard, this time without intensity, only enough to maintain appearance. The guards laughed when she exaggerated a feint. She grinned back, deflecting attention, as she always had. But between movements, she sensed it. The palace adjusting, arranging. Her path intersected Tomiwa's near the West Wing corridor just before midday. Neither had intended it. Neither avoided it. They slowed simultaneously. Angela, he said, nodding once. Tomiwa. Nothing more. Yet the silence stretched, elastic, charged. Her pulse quickened, not wildly, not recklessly, but enough to remind her she was alive in a way she had not fully noticed before. His gaze flickered, curious, careful. Then footsteps approached from behind. A servant carrying linens. The moment dissolved. They moved on. The palace had allowed it just long enough. Thomason experienced the shift first as irritation. He noticed it in the servant's precision, too precise. The way conversations faltered when he entered a room, the way even laughter seemed to modulate in his presence, as if the house itself were calibrating emotion. He disliked it. Order was stability. Structure prevented fracture. He had built his life on clarity, on roles defined and boundaries respected. Marriage, to him, was partnership grounded in trust and deliberate choice. Yet something about this place, this alignment of 4 lives beneath ancestral ceilings, resisted containment. He found Stephanie in the outer gallery mid-afternoon, reviewing correspondence. She looked composed, as always, but when she glanced up at him, her gaze did not carry softness or avoidance. It carried inquiry, measured, observant, as though she were studying not what he said, but what he withheld. He held her eyes for a fraction too long. "Is something troubling you?" he asked evenly. "No," she replied, equally calm. But the air between them said otherwise. He left unsettled. Tomiwa noticed the palace in subtler ways. The echo of his footsteps seemed delayed, as though the walls were responding rather than reflecting. Doors closed a heartbeat too late, hinges sighing softly after he passed. Even the hush that fell when Angela laughed carried a different tone now. Less carefree, more aware. He had lived his life in motion. Noise, admiration, momentum. Stillness was foreign territory, but now it wrapped around him, insistent, asking questions he had never needed to answer. At dusk, the light softened into amber and gold. Shadows lengthened across the gardens. He stood beneath the archway overlooking the inner courtyard and saw Angela there, alone near the fountain. She wasn't moving. That unsettled him more than if she had been sparring. She stood with her arms folded loosely, gaze distant. He did not approach. Neither did he turn away. They existed within the same frame of twilight, separated by stone and silence. The palace held its breath. That night, the house shifted. Not dramatically, not violently, but perceptibly. Drums sounded faintly from beyond the outer walls, too distant to belong to celebration, too steady to be coincidence, a rhythm older than the current generation. older than memory. Candles flickered along corridors, though no wind passed through open windows. Shadows stretched longer than their source permitted. Stephanie woke suddenly. Her heart pounded, though she could not recall the dream. Heat lingered along her skin, unfamiliar and disorienting. She sat upright, listening. The palace was quiet. Too quiet. Across the hall, Angela stirred at the exact same moment, breath catching in her throat. Neither knew the other was awake, but the house did. It shifted around them, wood creaking softly, as if adjusting its posture. Minutes passed, or perhaps seconds. Eventually, both rose from their beds without fully deciding to. Their steps carried them instinctively through dim corridors toward the inner courtyard, the one seldom used, where an old altar stood beneath open sky. It had been built generations ago, then gradually abandoned as rituals softened into symbolism. Tonight, it felt summoned. Stephanie arrived first. Angela entered seconds later. They stopped when they saw each other. The silence between them was not surprise. It was recognition. That this place, Angela whispered, her voice stripped of performance. It feels different. Stephanie nodded slowly, as though it remembers more than it should. They stepped closer to the altar but did not touch it. The stone was worn smooth by hands long gone. Vines curled along its edges, reclaiming what had been forgotten. "Do you think the ancestors are angry?" Angela asked quietly. The question lingered in the night air. Stephanie considered carefully. "No," she said at last. "I think they are watching." Angela's throat tightened slightly. "For what?" "For what we will choose." The word choose hung heavier than either expected. Above them, the stars burned steady and unblinking. The moon cast silver across the courtyard, illuminating the faint carvings along the altar's base. Symbols of union, of balance, of fate intertwined. A breeze passed through, though no leaves stirred elsewhere. The palace seemed to exhale, not in warning, not in approval, in patience, ancient and attentive. It did not interfere, it did not judge. It simply listened and waited. Certain than usual. Her dress was softer in tone, flowing where Stephanie's was structured. She smiled, bright, quick, automatic. Then she saw Stephanie, already seated. For the briefest second, her hand lifted to adjust her sleeve unnecessarily. A nervous gesture, uncharacteristic. Their eyes met. A flicker passed between them. Not accusation, not fear. Recognition. Angela held Stephanie's gaze just long enough to confirm that what she had felt yesterday had not been imagined. Stephanie's calm look returned the confirmation without drama. They sat. The air remained balanced, but barely. Thomason entered next. The room responded to him. It was subtle, but undeniable. His presence carried weight, not heavy, but anchored. He greeted them with a nod, measured and respectful, his voice low and steady. "Good morning." He took his place at the head of the table with natural authority. His cufflinks caught the light as he adjusted his sleeves. His posture was impeccable. Yet his gaze, as it settled briefly on Stephanie, lingered a fraction too long. Too brief to be intimacy. Too deliberate to be accidental. Stephanie lowered her eyes first. Not submissive, but strategic. Tomiwa arrived last. He paused at the threshold. It was almost imperceptible, that hesitation, but it existed. His eyes swept the table, as if assessing emotional terrain before stepping into it. When his gaze found Angela, something softened in his expression, an openness he did not entirely conceal before reshaping it into something lighter. "Good morning," he said, his tone easy, practiced. Angela returned the greeting. Her voice was warm, though quieter than usual. Not diminished, just thoughtful. He took his seat beside her. The geometry of the table was complete. Breakfast began. Bread was passed, butter spread, tea poured. The ritual of civility unfolded with seamless choreography. Polite conversation drifted across the table like harmless smoke. "How did you sleep?" Thomason asked calmly. "Well enough," Stephanie replied. Angela commented on the weather. Tomiwa responded with a light remark about upcoming engagements. Their words were structured, sensible, appropriate. None of them acknowledged the undercurrent threading through the room. Then It happened. Stephanie reached for the honey at the exact moment Thomason did. Neither anticipated the other. Their fingers brushed. It was not dramatic. It was not prolonged. But the contact was unmistakable. A spark, small, precise, traveled up Stephanie's arm and settled somewhere behind her ribs. Her breath caught, almost imperceptibly. She withdrew instantly, her composure snapping back into place like a well-practiced shield. "Apologies," she murmured, steady. Thomason's hand hovered for half a second longer than necessary. "Of course," he said. His tone was even. His eyes were not. Across the table, Angela was mid-laughter at something Tomiwa had just said, something trivial about a minor scheduling mishap. Her laughter rang bright, authentic. It was her strength, joy unfiltered. Tomiwa leaned in closer instinctively, drawn by it. His voice lowered as he added a quieter comment meant only for her. Their shoulders brushed. Angela inhaled sharply. The contact was brief, but it carried warmth, a heat that did not belong entirely to proximity. For one suspended heartbeat, the space between them closed enough to feel like something fragile and dangerous. Like the beginning of a promise neither had consciously made. Angela leaned back first. She smiled, too quickly. Silence followed. Not awkward, but thick. The kind of silence that stretches when everyone in a room senses something unnamed. The maidservants moved carefully as they refilled cups. One exchanged a fleeting glance with another. It was subtle, professional. They had seen tension before. They recognized this as something different, delicate. Angela leaned toward Stephanie, lowering her voice, just enough to avoid carrying across the table. "How do you cope with this?" she whispered, her tone half playful, half confessional. Stephanie did not respond immediately. She lifted her teacup, inhaled the steam, allowed herself a moment to steady her thoughts. "I breathe," she said finally. "And I remind myself that not everything that is felt must be followed." Angela's lips curved in reluctant admiration. "You've always been stronger than me." Stephanie's gaze shifted to her sister fully now. Not judgmental, not superior, intent. "Not stronger," she said gently, "just quieter." Angela studied her for a moment, realizing the truth in it. Stephanie did not lack feeling. She simply housed it differently. Across the table, Tomiwa's eyes flickered toward Angela, as if sensing the shift in her mood. Thomason straightened slightly, noticing Stephanie's stillness. No one addressed it. Soon after, duty intervened. Thomason rose first, adjusting his cuffs with habitual precision. His chair slid back with quiet authority. "We have meetings to attend," he said calmly. Tomiwa stood as well, smoothing his jacket. He offered Angela a small nod, a question disguised as courtesy. The sisters rose almost in unison, skirts smooth, napkins folded. Chairs returned to their exact positions. Everything restored, perfect again. As they moved toward the doorway, proximity became unavoidable. Shoulders passed close. The faint scent of cologne and perfume intertwined briefly in the air. Stephanie felt Thomason's presence behind her, close enough to register warmth, not close enough to accuse. Angela brushed past Tomiwa's sleeve as she stepped forward. Neither looked at the other. They exited separately, yet something lingered behind in the room. The honey jar remained slightly off-center. One teacup sat misaligned by half an inch, tiny imperfections in an otherwise flawless setting. Nothing had happened. No vows broken, no declarations made, no boundaries crossed. And yet, something had shifted. Not in action, but in awareness. And sometimes, awareness was far more dangerous. Her voice carried neither haste nor hesitation. As she entered, the day unfolded with intention, as though each of them believed motion could dissolve memory. The palace awoke fully now. Sunlight stretching across polished floors, banners stirring faintly in the breeze that slipped through high-arched windows. Servants moved with renewed rhythm. Guards rotated posts. Courtiers arrived with scrolls and sealed requests. It was a day like any other, which made the undercurrent beneath it all the more dangerous. Stephanie immersed herself in responsibility. If emotion threatened discipline, then discipline would prevail. She seated herself in the council chamber long before the appointed hour. Scrolls were laid before her in tidy stacks. Petitions regarding land disputes near the eastern border, ceremonial scheduling for the harvest festival, trade negotiations awaiting ratification. Her handwriting was steady as she annotated margins with decisive strokes. Summon the emissary, she instructed calmly. Nor hesitation. Advisors spoke, arguments were presented, concerns were weighed. Stephanie listened the way she always had, with complete attention. She asked precise questions. She dissected language. She found compromise without sacrificing authority. Those who worked beside her admired her composure. They whispered quietly of her strength, her intellect, her steadiness. None of them noticed the moments, fleeting but real, when her mind drifted to breakfast, to porcelain and honey, to the warmth of an accidental touch. She corrected herself swiftly each time. This is not indulgence. This is discipline. Her gaze sharpened. Her tone cooled. She signed documents with elegant finality. Yet beneath the polished exterior, something unsettled pressed against her restraint. It had not been the touch itself that disturbed her. It had been the pause afterward. The way Thomason had not immediately withdrawn. The way his eyes had held hers. Not questioning, not apologizing, recognizing. Stephanie closed the final scroll of the afternoon and dismissed the chamber with composed gratitude. Only when the doors shut behind the last advisor did she allow her shoulders to lower half an inch. Half an inch was all she permitted herself. Angela chose a different kind of distraction. Where Stephanie sought stillness, sharpened into control, Angela sought movement, sharpened into exhaustion. The courtyard rang with life. Guards sparred in rotating pairs. Wooden staffs struck in rhythmic precision. Dust rose from the earth beneath quick pivots and lunges. Angela stepped into the center without ceremony. Again, she commanded. Her opponent lunged. She countered fluidly. Their staffs collided with a sharp crack that echoed off stone walls. Sweat gathered at her temples. Sunlight clung to her skin, turning exertion into something almost luminous. She laughed when she disarmed a guard. "Is that all?" she teased. The onlookers grinned. They adored her vitality. Angela Douglas had always been energy-made flesh, untamed but controlled, fierce but magnetic. She pushed harder than necessary. She sparred longer than required. She refused water when offered. Between strikes, though, her mind betrayed her. Tomiwa's voice, low when it had dropped just for her. The warmth of his shoulder brushing hers. The ease. That was the worst part. It had been easy. Not forced. Not dramatic. Just natural. She miscalculated a step. Her foot slipped against loose earth. She stumbled, barely. "Careful," a guard called instinctively. Angela straightened immediately. Staff lifted again, chin high. "I am," she said, flashing a grin. But the grin faded quicker than usual. She was not certain she meant it. The training continued until her muscles burned and her breath came ragged. She welcomed the ache. Physical strain was honest. It did not lie. It did not complicate itself with thought. When she finally dismissed the guards, applause followed her as she exited. She did not turn around. Across the palace, Thomason found no comfort in authority. Meetings concluded swiftly beneath his direction. Trade proposals were negotiated, security briefings delivered. His answers came measured, intelligent, decisive, yet impatience lingered beneath his composure like a thread pulled too tight. He prided himself on clarity, on boundaries, on unwavering loyalty. But clarity had thinned. He found himself replaying Stephanie's silence, Not her apology, not her words, her restraint. Angela's laughter had always been predictable, bright, open, immediate. But Stephanie's quiet had weight. It was intentional, controlled. And when she had withdrawn her hand, it had not been flustered. It had been deliberate. That unsettled him more than it should have. He dismissed his final advisor earlier than necessary. Tomorrow, he said curtly, though nothing required delay. When the room emptied, he remained standing at the window overlooking the inner garden. The palace had always felt stable to him. Today it felt aware, as though it too had noticed. Tomiwa fled. Not dramatically, not in anger, but with urgency disguised as spontaneity. He left the palace grounds mid-afternoon, keys turning in the ignition with sharp precision. The engine roared to life. He drove faster than he needed to. Music turned loud enough to crowd out thought. The town greeted him, as it always did, with easy recognition. Shopkeepers waved. Familiar faces called out. Invitations were extended. He smiled. He laughed. He leaned into conversation as though nothing had shifted. Still, something tugged at him. The palace, with its watching walls and careful silences, had followed him. He slowed eventually, leaving the town behind, steering toward the riverbank where the air felt less confined. The engine quieted. The world softened. He rested his elbows against the steering wheel and stared ahead. This shouldn't be complicated, he muttered to himself. He had never been prone to overthinking. Life had always moved with clarity for him. Desire, decision, action. But this was not desire alone. It was connection, and connection required responsibility. He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his seat. He did not start the car again for a long while. By evening, they've returned, one by one. Stephanie first, then Thomason. Angela later, hair still faintly damp from washing away the dust of training. Tomiwa last. The palace received them without comment. Dinner was set beneath softer light than morning, the atmosphere gentler. Silver replaced porcelain, wine replaced tea. Conversation flowed carefully. "How was your day?" Thomason asked evenly. "Productive," Stephanie replied. "And yours?" Angela asked Tomiwa. "Busy," he said, offering a smile that did not fully reach his eyes. No one pressed. No one mentioned breakfast, but awareness moved beneath the table like a quiet current. Angela avoided leaning too close. Stephanie kept her hands folded neatly in her lap. Thomason measured his gaze. Tomiwa moderated his tone. They were disciplined, they were careful, they were failing, not in action, but in denial. Night came gently. The corridors emptied, footsteps faded, doors closed. In separate rooms, beneath separate ceilings, each lay awake longer than they would admit. Stephanie stared at the canopy above her bed, counting her breaths. Angela turned onto her side, then onto her back, restless. Thomason clasped his hands behind his head, staring into darkness. Tomiwa lay still, listening to the faint hum of the palace settling for the night. They listened to the house breathe, to the silence between rooms, to the invisible threads stretching quietly through carriage walls. Distraction had failed. Movement had failed. Authority had failed. Laughter had failed. Something had been stirred, not recklessly, not dramatically, but undeniably, and no amount of daylight could undo it. They arrived with